We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Dalet Amud Beis in Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 104b. The Mishnah is in the middle of discussing a situation where chalitza is done, but it is done without the spitting. Amar le Rebbe Elazar. Rebbe Elazar says to Rabbi Akiva, Kacha Yeyasa. It says you have to do it like this. Kol davar shu ma'isa ma'akev. Any part of the action is going to be ma'akev, meaning Rebbe Elazar is arguing based on the pasuk that spitting is ma'akev, and if it's not done, it's not going to be a kosher chalitza. So Amar le Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva said back to Rebbe Elazar, Misham Raya, you think that's a proof? The way you're supposed to interpret the pasuk is it has to be a maisa that is done by the man with the man. As Rashi over here says, maisa beish chalitza sha'isha osa maisa begufo shalish. Things that are done with the body of the man. Lafuke rakika, that does not include spitting. The lav maisa beishu, because that's not done with the man. That's just the woman spitting, and therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, that is not going to be ma'akev. And the Mishnah continues, hacherish shenechlatz v'hachareshes shecholza. So let's say you have a deaf-mute man who does chalitza, or you have a deaf-mute woman who does chalitza. V'choletzes lekatan, or let's say you have a woman that does chalitza with a boy who is a minor. Chalitza sapsula. In all of these cases, the chalitza is going to be pasul. Ketana shecholza. Let's say you have a minor girl who does chalitza. So tachlot mishetagdil. She should do the chalitza again when she becomes an adult. V'im lo cholza chalitza sapsula. And if she does not do so, then the chalitza is pasul. Cholza b'shnayim o b'shlosha v'nimsa echad me'an karov o pasul. Let's say you do chalitza with only 2 judges, or you do it with 3 judges, but it turns out one of the 3 judges is a relative or is disqualified to be a judge, so effectively it's 2. Chalitza sapsula, that is going to be a chalitza that is pasul, because you do not have the requisite 3 judges. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan Hasandler machshirin. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan Hasandler, they say that it's still kosher. Umayza be'echad shecholatz beino leveino bebeso asurim. There was an incident where one person did chalitza together with the woman in prison, and it was only them. There was no judges at all. And that incident came in front of Rabbi Akiva, and he said that it was kosher. And Rashi over here says, again, if the man is a deaf mute, it is a pasal chalitza lepotra b'mokam kosher that does not pater her. Let's say there's a brother that is kosher. In other words, she still has to deal with the issue of yibam or chalitza with the brother that is kosher. Also, let's say she's a chareshes, she's a deaf mute, that's pasal. He atzma einer neftaras b'chalitza, meaning she is not pater through that chalitza. With her, the only solution is yibam. If he doesn't want to marry her, so then he should just divorce her with a get. Again, then it said, let's say it's 2 judges that are kosher, or let's say it's 3, but one of them is a relative or disqualified. Again, it's only going to be 2 judges. Chalitza so psula. So the first Tana says that chalitza is pasul. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yochanan Hasandler machshirin v'lo garsina b'shnayim. You don't have to say that Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan Hasandler. You don't have to have the text that they say kosher with 2, because we're already dealing with a case with 2. The b'shnayim masak nami Tanakama. The Tanakama is talking about with 2. So again, that is what they're saying, that 2 is sufficient. And then again, the Mishnah goes on to say that Rabbi Akiva allowed it even beino leveino bebeso asurim. And the Gemara says, Amar Rava, Rava says, Hashta da'amrit kriya lo ma'akva. Now that you're saying in the Mishnah that the recitation is not ma'akev, it's not necessary for the chalitza to be kosher. Lafikach, therefore, ilem v'ilemes, let's say you have a mute, the man is a mute, or the woman is a mute, shecholzu, and they do chalitza some kshera. So the chalitza is going to be kosher, because again, the recitation is not ma'akev, it's not absolutely necessary. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, cheresh nechlatz v'chareshes shecholza, if someone's a deaf mute and he does chalitza, or she's a deaf mute and she does chalitza, or let's say she does chalitza with a minor, chalitza psula, the chalitza is going to be pasul. So my time, what's the reason? Lav mishum de lo b'nei kriyaninu. Isn't it a problem because they're not able to do the recitation? And that would seem to contradict what Rava said. Rava said if a mute does the chalitza, it's kosher, but here by the deaf mute isn't the reason because they're not able to do the recitation, so a mute should be the same. So the Gemara says, lo, no, mishum de lav b'nei dayaninu. It could be the explanation of the Mishnah is that when you have a deaf mute, so that's somebody that doesn't have das, and somebody that doesn't have das cannot do the chalitza. Maybe it has nothing to do with the fact that they can't do the recitation. So the Gemara says, Yachi, if so, ilaim v'ilemes nami, by a mute person also, let's say the man's a mute or the woman is a mute, don't they also lack das? So the Gemara says, no, Amar Rava says, Ilaim vilemis b'nei deyoninu. The mutes, they actually do have das, ufumayu dekayvlu. It's just that their mouth is hurting them, meaning to say there's something that prevents them from being able to speak, but it is not a lack of das that is preventing them from speaking. And the Gemara continues, V'amri devei Rabbi Yanai, but wasn't it taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yanai? Lefi she'eno ba'amar v'amra. It says the exact opposite. It says the reason why, when you have a deaf mute, the reason why their chalitza is no good is because they cannot do the recitation. He cannot speak, and she cannot speak, and the pasuk says they have to be able to speak. And so the Gemara says, you're right. Elaki itmar de Rava aseifa itmar. Rather, when Rava made his statement regarding the mutes, that was actually going on the end of the Mishnah. It said at the end of the Mishnah, cheresh nechlatz v'charesh shecholza v'chaletzas menakot. And again, if a deaf mute does chalitza, whether it's the man or the woman, and if somebody does chalitza with a minor chalitza, so psula, the chalitza is possible. And Omar Rava, and Rava said on that, based on that, hashta de amrit kriya ma'akva. Now that you're saying the recitation is mi'akev, lefikach ilem v'ilem shecholzu chalitza and psula. Therefore, the same would be true by a mute. If he's a mute or if she is a mute, if they do chalitza, the chalitza is bad because apparently the recitation is ma'akev. Now the problem is that the beginning of the Mishnah said the recitation is not ma'akev. And so to that, the Gemara answers, Umas nisan krebi zera. Our Mishnah, which at the beginning seems to say the recitation is not ma'akev, but then it says that if the person cannot perform the recitation, it is ma'akev. That follows the principle of Rabbi Zera. Diyam Rabbi Zera, because Rabbi Zera said, Kol haroi labila, anytime something is fit, is able to be mixed. He's talking here about a carbon mincha, so ain bila ma'akevesbo. The actual mixing is not ma'akev. It just has to be able to be mixed, but you don't have to actually mix. V'chol she'ein roi labila, and if it's not able to be mixed, bila ma'akeves, then the mixing is going to be ma'akev. In other words, the fact that you couldn't potentially mix it, that actually is a problem. And the same thing is true over here. The actual recitation is not going to be ma'akev, but if you're not able to do the recitation, that is going to be ma'akev. And the Gemara continues, Shalchu leile avua de Shmuel. They sent to the father of Shmuel the following message. Yevamos sherakaka tachlotz. Let's say you have a Yevama who does the spitting in terms of the chalitza process. She has to complete the chalitza process. Rashi over here says, Yevamos sherakaka lifnei bezdin. Once she spits in front of the bezdin, tachlotz means to say, dinifseles alein miyivam. At that point in time, she is now disqualified from the other brothers from doing yibum, and therefore she has to complete the chalitza process. And the Gemara says, Mechlal, this implies, like Rashi just said, the ifsulallah me'achin, that by doing the spitting, she is now disqualified from the other brothers. And so the Gemara says money. So the Gemara says, who is this following? Meaning, which Tana is this statement following? Ilema Rabbi Akiva. Now, if you're going to say it's following Rabbi Akiva, Hashta umah b'makom mitzvah. Now, in a situation like this, which is a situation of mitzvah, the ikol meimar midi dahava aimurim, that you could say this should be compared to a murim by a carbon. The halacha of it by a murim by a carbon, the emurim are the part of the carbon that is put onto the mizbeach. So you could say dechilesnu lo ma'akve. When it comes to emurim, if they're not around, so they're not ma'akiv. You could still eat the meat of the carbon without burning the emurim on the mizbeach. But if they are around, they are ma'akev. Yet Amar Rabbi Akiva lo ma'akva. Yet Rabbi Akiva says that by the spitting, it is not ma'akev. Rabbi Akiva in our Mishnah said that let's say you don't spit in terms of the chalitza process, it is not going to be ma'akev. It's not going to hold back the chalitza from being kosher, even though there is a reason to say that if you were to compare it to a murim by a carbon. But me'achin ifsala, so then you're going to say that if you do the spitting, that should be enough of a chosh of an act that it should disqualify her from the brothers. It doesn't make sense. In other words, the Gemara is saying, according to Rabbi Akiva, who says the spitting is not ma'akev, there's no way that the spitting should disqualify her from the brothers. Rashi over here explains, Aimurim dechi isnu ma'akvi. The Aimurim, if they are around, they are ma'akev basar me'achila. You're not allowed to eat the meat of the carbon if, again, you didn't put the Aimurim on the mizbeach. That's a halacha in Psachim. But if they're not around, so then they're not ma'akev. Let's say they become tameh or they become lost, then it's not ma'akev. So over here also, name we should say, even though it is not an important ma'isa, but since it is possible at least to do the spitting, again, that's similar to dechi isnu, it's something that is possible to do, you might say it's something that should be ma'akev, yet Rabbi Akiva lo ma'akva. Yet Rabbi Akiva says, nevertheless, it's not ma'akev, even though there's an argument to say that it should be ma'akev. Rabbi Akiva says it's not ma'akev, and therefore you're going to say it disqualifies from the brothers. That doesn't make sense. So rather you'll say this statement over here, that once she does the spitting, it disqualifies her from the brothers. Maybe it follows Rebbe Lazar, as Rashi says. Rebbe Lazar says that if you don't do the spitting, it's ma'akev in terms of being a kosher chalitza. So alma mais. So you see that it's really a choshev kind of mais, an important part of the process of chalitza. So maybe we're going according to him, according to Rebbe Lazar, that it's an important part of the process. So then she's disqualified from the brothers from that point in time. But that doesn't make sense either. Because this should be no different. Also by karbanos, there's an idea. Let's say you have two things that are matir the carbon, and the halacha according to Rebbe Lazar happens to be ushnei devarim hamatirin ein malin ze below ze. Let's say you have two things that are matir the carbon, and we'll see an example of this in a moment. So they do not sanctify one without the other. You need both in order to sanctify, and so the same thing should be true over here. When it comes to the issue of chalitza, you have two things that are part of the process. You have the spitting and you have the removal of the shoe, and just like Rebbe Lazar says that you need both things by a carbon in order to sanctify the carbon, so too over here you should need both things in order to make it that you're actually starting the process, and therefore Rebbe Lazar should say that the spitting alone should not disqualify her from the brothers. And so finally the Gemara says Elika Rebbe. Rather, this is following Rebbe's opinion, which does match up in terms of what he says by karbonos. It's true over here as well. The Tanyas, we learned in a brisa, kivsei atzeres, when it comes to these sheeps that are brought on Shavuos, ein mekatchen halechem ela b'shchita. They only sanctify the bread when they are shechted. Keitzad, how so? Shachtan lishmon v'zorg daman lishmon. Let's say, for example, you shech them properly, you do that lishma, you do the zrikas hadam, you sprinkle the blood properly lishma. So then kiddush halechem, obviously, the lechem will be sanctified. Shachat shelo lishman v'zorak lishman. Let's say he doesn't do the shchita properly, he doesn't do that lishma, but he does the zrika lishma. So lo kiddush halechem, then it's not going to sanctify the bread. Shachtan lishman. Let's say he does the shchita lishma, v'zorak daman shelo lishman, but he does the zrika not lishma. So kadosh, it's going to be holy in some respects. V'yeino kadosh, it's not going to be holy in other respects. Divrei Rebbe, that is the opinion of Rebbe. And so you see again, according to Rebbe, even one of the two steps is enough to sanctify. So too over here, if you just do the spitting, that's going to be enough to disqualify her from the brothers. Rebbe Lazar, Rebbe Shimon, Rebbe Lazar, Rebbe Shimon argues on Rebbe. He says, Liolam eno kadosh, it's not going to be sanctified at sheyishchot lishman v'yizrok daman lishman, until you actually do the shchita lishma and until you do the zrika lishma. And Rashi over here says, "V'ashnei devarim hamatir in malan zebelozeh in mekadshin shtei alechem lios kadosh kedushas haguf." We're talking about sanctifying the bread in order to be kadosh. Liposel biyotze velina, meaning it's going to be sanctified. That now, if it's taken out or if it's left overnight, it's going to be posel. It doesn't get that. It doesn't attain that status of holiness. Ella b'shchita, unless you do the shchita. V'afa pishein tuunin tenufa chayinim alechem. Now, even though you're going to be waving these animals around alive with the bread, ein tenufasan mekachan. The waving is not going to sanctify. Ella shchitasan. Rather, what it's going to be is the shchita of the animal. It sanctifies. The gomer me'al nazir. The chsiv v'yasa ayil yasa zevach shalom Hashem. Al salamatzos tola kosav asiya salamatzos bezvichas ha'ayil b'perakatchelas. Again, it's learned out from the ayil of the nazir, and so that is a shita. Again, that's the shita of Rebbe, and therefore we'll say that this statement over here also regarding the rikika by the spitting by the chalitza. Again, that should follow the opinion of Rebbe. And the Gemara continues in general. Umi amar Rebbe Akiva, but does Rebbe Akiva really say rikika lo pasla, that the spitting is not going to disqualify from the brothers? The assumption here has been that the spitting is not going to disqualify from the brothers according to Rebbe Akiva. Is that really true? But we learned in a brisa, cholsa velo. Let's say she does the chalitza, meaning she removes the shoe, but she does not. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Hey Amud Aleph.